This is a Film Stories original podcast.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I am a writer and film critic and also the author of the book Darkness Visible, the Cinema of Jonathan Glazer. And as part of our series on Jonathan Glazer, I am delighted to be joined by Tom Schoen, who has written a number of books, including the Nolan variations and a book about Martin Scorsese and a forthcoming book on the director Paul Greengrass, which is coming out in November. Thank you for joining me, Tom.
Oh, pleasure to be here, as always.
Well, I mean, there is going to be straight away a sort of bump in our ordinary conversation because the film that we are discussing of Jonathan Glazer's is his most recent and his darkest film, Zone of Interest, also the film for which he won the Oscar. So we were talking before we started recording about when we first saw this. Well, what was your first experience of seeing this film?
I saw it first on my own in a screening room, as critics often do, and I was blown away by the film. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. I'd been hearing stories about it, and the stories that I was hearing before I saw it were the crew who had worked on it were just sort of, all these stories were filtering through about how they'd found this really unusual way of working. They'd never worked this way before, and how incredible it was to be. So I was just picking up all these sort of tremors on the track. I was like, what's going on with this movie? What's so unusual about it? What are they talking about? Why is it so unusual? And then I saw it, and then you see like the sort of technical kind of tour de force of it. The use of sound. The way he shot it with this kind of almost, CCTV kind of style, no close-ups, all this sort of thing was just, and I was like, and it instantly made sense to me. And I kind of thought, this is very much a film that deserves to exist. And, I had thought that it was almost impossible to kind of come up with a new film. The Holocaust has been so, from being not covered at all, by movies, it's been since sort of 1993 and Schindler's List, it's been covered sort of, really endlessly. And I sort of thought, well, there's no angle left. There's nothing left. And so it astounded me that that not only was there a new angle, but it was just a wholly original one. That there was a wholly original new film and take on the Holocaust. Absolutely astonished me. But then the moment you see it, you're like, of course, yeah, of course, of course, this approach was, and it instantly fills its space, and becomes part of the conversation. And so it's once impossible to imagine before you see it, and then inevitable once you have seen it. It's kind of, which is a good definition of a kind of classic. It's just sort of it felt instantly. Familiar to me in the sense of what it was trying to do, and and then I faced the uphill struggle of trying to get my wife to see it because I go to a lot of screenings on my own, and then try and get my friends and family along to films that I particularly like, but there was no combination of words there was no mood, there was no occasion that ever seemed right to sort of drag her along to see the Zone of Interest. I tried multiple times, multiple occasions, and somehow the moment was never quite right, for this film. And, finally I did sort of subject her to it, and then she kind of emerged sort of ashen-faced, and as people do, it's an experience. I think that was partly one of the reasons why it was such a box office success, right? I mean, you really did, you came out of it. And, in the classic kind of Pauline Kael always used to say after she'd seen a movie, like, what just happened to me? And that's kind of the question, isn't it? Like, what just happened to me? What was that? Like that's really the only thing you can really say. Forget about good, bad, all the other things. What was that? And I just sort of afterwards, I remember getting really, really interested in like how they had shot it, and the sound guys, how they had gathered sound for it, and so on. So and I was listening to all sorts, all over the place. I was just really hungry for information about this thing because it just was something new under the sun. And so, yeah, I guess you could say I was pretty impressed by it.
Ditto. I mean, I went to see it at the press screening in Cannes, so it was the very first showing of the film. It was
Wow.
happened at the same time that the premiere was taking place in the Lumiere. I was in the Debussy with everybody, with all the critics, and you jammed in there. It's really, it's one of the hottest tickets of the festival. It was a pretty vintage year. It was the year that Anatomy of a Fall won the Palme d'Or. And we're all jammed in there. And halfway, I'm very impressed by the film. But I remember, I really have this vivid memory of halfway through the movie, thinking, almost getting sort of angry with the movie, and thinking, kind of, how dare you use the Holocaust as as a way of showing off your nous, your filmmaking prowess, And then, as the film progressed, and specifically that very last section, which we'll come on to, I'm sure, I felt that actually answered that criticism and made me and resolved it for me. And then I walked out, and as is often the case, there was a huge buzz. There's a huge sound of people talking and arguing and discussing it and getting into it and everything. And I thought, I just kind of want to go home. I just kind of want to sit with this for a while. I don't want to. I don't feel it's relevant to, or kind of, it's almost like it's not respectful to sit down and go, well, how do you feel this is compared to Under the Skin, or compared to another Holocaust movie or something? It's just like, well, that's like going to Auschwitz and giving it a review on TripAdvisor.
Oh God, yeah. Well, I mean, I definitely saw that some they did see it as a technical trick, and I seem to remember in the New York Times there was a piece. I think in America in particular, there's a lot of sensitivity around the Holocaust, to the extent that sometimes it still feels like that sacred subject that, who dares tackle it, and you better have some damn good aesthetic kind of background to do it, and how dare you, and all that kind of stuff like that. There was more of that in the American press than there was in the British press, I seem to remember. And, I mean, the thing I kind of felt about it was that it was a solution to a problem, and it was a good solution to a problem. Now, the problem is, here is this rabidly fascinating, section of European history, right? And the problem is that no film can be allowed to show a Nazi, particularly one who's connected with the death camps, in sympathetic fashion, meaning the protagonist of the film, the sort of central figure sort of taking us through. Now, the only reason that Schindler's List works, of course, is because Schindler has a change of heart, and it's sort of, that's the key difference. But, I'd sort of come at this, I'd spent a lot of time before I saw this film. I was actually looking at, there's a series of Gita Sereny books. She did, Austrian writer. She did a biography of Albert Speer, and she also did a book about,
was a child murderer. He did as well.
Yeah, well, that too.
Yeah.
And she also did a book called Into That Darkness, I think it's called, which is about one of the commandants at Treblinka. And so I've been sort of reading these books and rereading them, thinking, is there anything to adapt here, like kind of for a screenplay? Is there any kind of way forward? And I sort of found through sort of trial and error that, there's a basic golden rule, which is that you cannot have a sympathetic, by which I mean, the moment you start to follow a character in a drama, and you start to care about that person's career ups and downs, or their romantic sort of ups and downs, as you do with kind of, many of the characters we see on screen, it feels absolutely blasphemous for a movie to do that with a Nazi in any way connected with the death camps, and for what feels like very good reason. So there's this interesting problem: how on earth then are you to portray these people, assuming that you think that they're of interest sufficient for a film, aesthetic interest, dramatic interest? How on earth then do you approach them if you're not going to make them the sympathetic protagonist, which in a way the whole vocabulary of sort of Hollywood movie making exists to secure that basic sort of latch of sympathy, identification with that person we see there up on the screen. Like everything from kind of camera angles to editing, the whole bag of tricks is all about getting the audience to emotionally latch on to this person they see, identify with them, see the world through as they see it, care about where they're going, follow them through their journey. Right? That's cinema just sort of exists, at least in Hollywood, to do that. And so what Glazer's done in this is he's completely short-circuited that entire mechanism of identification with the people we see on the screen, and the kind of the latching on of the sympathy, and it's through all the sort of tricks that editing, camera angle, all that stuff. If you sort of take out all the the normal beats, and let's say close-ups are a really good example of the way in which you do that. Something happens, okay, close-up. How did they react to that? You're immediately now following that person's reaction. What happens if you deny a movie all of that? Just completely throw away all these little tricks that it has to get people to identify with the people on screen. Like, what happens? Like, what kind of film are you left with? Like, is it watchable? Is it boring? Is it a film even? Is it a documentary? What is it? What are you left with? And the zone of interest gives us the answer to all those sort of questions. And it's sort of, so I see it as just a very elegant solution to like a problem that sort of bedeviled, the portrayal of these events, and you get hints of it in, Son of Saul, which was the movie that came out about the member of the Sonderkommando, who is one of the Jews who are asked to clear away the bodies from and that had a similar kind of formal rigor in that you only saw where he was directing his gaze, and of course, given his sort of position, that meant that he was always averting it from the crimes that were going on, the perpetrators of those crimes, and he's just simply, if you like, putting one foot in front of the other and trying to get on with his business. Like that began to hint at the sort of elegant solution that I think Glazer comes up with in this film, right? Where he, if you like, takes that to the nth degree, like, and takes that kind of formal experiment of Son of Saul and just sort of says, I'm going to do the whole movie and it's going to be, like that. So I felt, I must admit, pretty excited by it when I saw it. I was like, here it is. This is how you do it. This is the solution. So I didn't sort of feel so much of the trickery, but I certainly saw that like technique and a certain self-consciousness about technique had to be part of the answer. You just can't do a normal movie about the perpetrators of these crimes, because the moment music would be another example. There's very little music in the film, so yet another crutch, by which we are kind of eased into identification with the events we see, just sort of snatched away. I seem to remember listening to kind of an interview with him, and he was talking about the soundtrack that he commissioned, and from, who is it who did
Mika Levy.
Yeah, of course, who'd done Under the Skin, fantastic, innovatory kind of film sound designer. And and she had written much more music for it originally than they ended up using. And they found just by trial and error that they kept on trying to put music onto it, and it kept on shaking it off, And I just had this image, the way he was describing it, as if they were just shucking this sort of unnecessary dramatic artifice it didn't need or want, or felt superfluous. And I thought that was interesting. And he was trying to find it. He was trying to follow something and find it in the making of it. And yeah, I mean, it's still. I mean, what did you? You know more, having written this book, about like kind of it seems like there was a fair amount of trial and error in the way that he came up with this sort of set technique. Like, it was sort of, he wasn't entirely sure, and he sort of found the film as he kind of went along. I mean, it's a sort of a bet, isn't it? Like, and you wonder whether it's going to sort of work out.
I mean, they bought the rights for the Martin Amis novel, which it's sort of nominally based on, but has very little actual connection with beyond the title and the setting. They bought the rights to that while the book was still in galleys, while it was still before it was published. Jim Wilson, his producer, and they did a lot of research. And Glazer often talks about how long it takes him between movies is because he's doing so much research into them that that research he considers filming as well. So he's sort of working at it, and he might even be doing short films, or he might be doing installations of things, which are also sort of trying out little sketches of what he intends to do later. One of the main things that he changes with the book is he takes away all of which chimes perfectly with what you've just said. He takes away all the fictional furniture or veils. In the original book, the characters all have names, so you can go, okay, that so and so doll is actually Rudolf Hoss, and in the film it's like, no, he's just Hoss. We just go back to the original names and the people. And in terms of the camera technique, he'd already pioneered this with Under the Sun, where they actually invented these micro cameras in order to have nothing stopping people from, nothing impeding people from giving naturalistic performances, or even not knowing they were being filmed. Just Scarlett Johansson interacting with the public, and they wouldn't know they were interacting with Scarlett Johansson because she's in disguise and everything, and they could use that film and that footage and get those documentary-like sort of performances that were non-performances. Here, it was a bunch of actors. It was, kids that they had cast and all the rest of it. But they felt that if they didn't have to keep coming and saying cut and coming in and changing makeup and stuff, they could basically set up the house and give them certain tasks to do during the day, and scenarios and whatnot, and then retreat to like a neighboring like van where they would be in basically like one of those outside broadcasting things that you'd have for sport with multiple screens, and they could just watch it play out. And if they needed to adjust something, they could, or send the postman there or what have you. And so the children didn't, there would be a camera in the teepee in the garden. There would be a camera in the corners of the rooms. They would have these lenses, so they would pick up everything. Everything was being shot in 7K, which also takes away, and this is another sort of fictitious veneer that I feel you see with, Schindler's List being in black and white, for instance. Or the soundtrack you talk about, everything the cinematography feels incredibly modern because it's digital. It's this very sharp, very focused. The focus has an incredible depth of field. So from the sort of something in the foreground, the furniture in the foreground, to the wallpaper on the wall at the far side of the room, everything is in sharp focus, and that makes it feel incredibly immediate and modern. and kind of new. The characters are talking about how new the house is, how it's just been renovated. So you don't feel like you're watching something historical. You feel like the cinematic language is new. I mean, I think it was a bit of a tasteless comment, but it is a good one, where they said sort of "Big Brother in the Nazi house" was one of the sort of comments that was on their sort of goals. You know, this is what we're going to do. I saw him recently in Bologna. I actually got the opportunity to meet him after I'd written the book, and he was doing a Q&A there, and someone was saying precisely the point you were making earlier about how this felt like a new way. And he made I thought it was a kind of a generous but also very intelligent response to the sort of the question which was, I couldn't do this without Schindler's List, because without Schindler's List, you wouldn't necessarily know what was going on behind the wall.
Right.
So in order
Well,
for
that's great.
you to hear stuff and have the image in your head, you have to
Yeah.
have already seen the films that other people made, which allow me not to show it.
Yeah. No, that's true. I mean, it's definitely. I mean, Spielberg didn't he? He came out very, gallantly and said, proclaimed this was the sort of, the next sort of best film about the Holocaust since his own, film, which was a kind of a nice show of solidarity for like what he was doing. But I do sense that, in a sense, like the Zone of Interest is completely sort of overturning Schindler's List in the sense that. I know. Listen. I know there are a few people. I admire Spielberg's film just as much as anybody. It did when I watched The Zone of Interest. It did make me kind of think again about the means by which Spielberg sort of secures sympathies in Schindler's List, and it actually makes me realize what a traditional movie it is in the sense that it's pretty much in the vein of Lawrence of Arabia, like it's a sort of it's a movie.
Billy Wilder was going to direct it.
Yeah, it's a sort of movie about the change of heart in somebody who's in the enemy camp. In a sense, you don't want it's not a white savior movie exactly, but it kind of is of that type. That sort of genre, very beloved to Hollywood, Dance with Wolves, Lawrence of Arabia, Schindler's List. Where essentially somebody's in the camp of the enemy, so has a change of heart and goes over to the other side. Like that's a very classic sort of Hollywood move, journey, and I totally see that in 1993 it was the only film possible, about the subject, and it kind of comes very glancingly close to sort of what went on in Auschwitz, doesn't it? But it's in its own way too. It kind of averts its eyes at the very, you see some of the prisoners being kind of taken down those steps into one of the chambers, and that's it. Of the sort of machinery of death, we see very little, and so it's sort of in its own way. Averts its gaze, as probably is the only way it could. I still think that you can't go into the gas chamber. I've seen films that do it, and it doesn't feel right. It just doesn't feel a representation of that experience. I think you really have to go back to Shoah for that. That's sort of but it's not. So, indirection has to be part of the vocabulary of almost any filmmaker approaching the subject. I sort of think it's a bleakness. Indirection are the only ways that you can do it. You have to sort of sneak up, and so. But I don't think anybody's done it quite as kind of as starkly as Glazer does in The Zone of Interest. Like it's the obliqueness and is the film, that kind of then his ability to, the use of sound, much remarked upon, is really quite astonishing. And it's sort of, listen, I'm a big sound nerd. I love sort of films that are that have interesting use of sort of off-screen sound, whether it's kind of in A Man Escaped or or the No Country for Old Men, where you hear that little, you hear a light bulb being unscrewed in the corridor outside where he's sort of sheltering in the dark, and that just sort of, the use of off-screen sound is, to me, like, it's just one of the great sort of stealth tools of the movies, and it's very good, I think, at like kind of, at horrific situations, because frequently you can't show the most horrific things, or if you do, this sort of, it will lead to a kind of a disappointment about what you're seeing, or it's, too explicit, or but I think with sound, I don't think you're ever in that, because you're just sort of suggesting, and so it just is the most, because your imagination is just firing overtime, like it's just it's so horrifying. So I think that's kind of really part of its achievement is to render these things horrifying, these events horrifying, without having been so crass as to sort of show us, people dying or people getting shot, or what went on in the gas chambers. I think it's just, and it's remarkable how it succeeds as a kind of a sort of horror movie almost. It's not a horror movie; it's not in anywhere near, but the experience, the sort of physiological experience of watching is not too unlike watching, a horror film. It's I don't know. I mean, what did it? You tell me about the sound, because I know that they went recording. I think I remember interviews where they were talking about like kind of how they went around with microphones. They went around Europe looking for sounds for this film, didn't they? They kind of they went to demonstrations. They went to like all these different trouble spots, collecting sounds. And there are such heartrending, ghastly things going on in the soundtrack of it that you wonder where they went, that they were picking up this material, like
football stadiums was one.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, and they were picking up people, genuinely arguing and shouting at each other, and they were using that as soundtrack in the thing. I mean, I don't know if there was scripted dialogue that they were putting in there and putting into the mix. I tend to think there was, because there are certain things where the actual what is being said in the camp, or what you're overhearing, refers back to stuff which you've seen.
Where's the apple?
Well, exactly, and I mean, I think that's one of the key moments, which is very easy to miss on a first viewing. I think I only really got it later on. Because I mean, this is a film of almost, there are horrific absurdities in this film as well. There are bits of the film which, are almost tempting you to laugh, because they're so absurd. Seeing him in his ice cream seller white suit, how it's almost too on the nose how white that suit is, in the midst of the, and again, I mean, it goes back a little bit to what you're saying about how you can't show. I mean, there was that film by the Daniels, Everything Everywhere All at Once, where, they had a rock with googly eyes, and all of a sudden that's a character, Everything is a character. Everything, as soon as you put two lines together, it starts to become a character, it starts to become a narrative. So, when he takes his children out to go fishing, and then he notices there's human remains in the river, and then it's raining as he's dragging them back on the boat, you can't help but feel, oh, poor Nazis, and they're being scrubbed in the bath, and the child is being reproved and is being said, "Oh, it won't kill you." And of course, it won't kill you. It is the human remains of people who've been killed.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
the maid could very well end up being the ash that they scrub out as well. So it's
I mean, it's
just
sort of,
irony upon irony.
yeah. I mean, I think he must have shown great restraint in a way, in a sort of there's not belaboring that. But, there were so many points where he could have sharpened those ironies, and I kind of like that he doesn't. I remember that line. It really lands, doesn't it? But there aren't too many of that. I kind of like it would feel too much like a work of like a work of art, which is to say, a work of artifice. If there was too much of those sort of bits of dialogue, essentially, that sort of that where the theme of the movie is somehow pushed further along the track by the character speaking, which is kind of like a way of kind of writing dialogue that I absolutely hate. Instead it feels properly random, but he does fashion from what feel like, to go back to the apple. I mean, I sort of loved the way that's sort of introduced through those inverted, the negative imagery where you see the girl going around,
It's a heat camera. It's a heat camera from a Polish military firm and so what you're seeing is not light. This is another sort of like, this is where it's perfect for my book, because it is literally darkness visible. It's literally, if you looked at that image with your eyes, you would just see pitch black. But you're picking up the heat of the body, and you're picking up the heat of the apple that has been held in a hand.
When I first started seeing those sequences in the movie, and this is kind of how kind of wonderfully warped, in a sense, the film is, I remember thinking, oh no, what fresh hell is this? Because I couldn't identify what was going on. All I could see was that there was something nocturnal, and it was something, there was some act of subterfuge going on. Somebody was trying to hide something. And I just thought, what nefarious evil is going on here? Now, in the kind of black is white kind of framework of the film, okay, what's going on here is kindness, right? And I thought how absolutely appropriate that kindness would show up in this film as this kind of inverted, almost hellish image. Do you know what I mean? It sort of looks so scary that I would be frightened almost of kindness in this film. And then, of course, I understood what was going on, that the servant girl was planting food for the prisoners, that, we then later find, tragically, someone is shot at one of we hear that one of the prisoners has been discovered over the, we hear this over the wall with one of those apples, and is summarily shot. I think I'm right in saying, and then we hear the younger boy, the son of the Huss family, who says he's playing with something in his room, and he says, I won't do that again. And it instantly becomes incorporated into his play. He's playing, and he hears a prisoner being shot, and he says it's so offhand and chilling. He just sort of says, "Oh, he won't be doing that again," as if he's just being slapped on the wrist. Like the boy is hearing it and interpreting it through his worldview, which is, kids do bad things, they get told off, and that's sort of how he's interpreting what he's hearing. A man's being executed, and he hears and sort of puts his gloss on it as if it's no more than a child being reprimanded. And I get, it's one of those things where I don't know how he arrived at that. It doesn't feel kind of scripted in the sense of somebody sitting down and kind of pouring he's not sitting down and writing literature. It may have been a sort of almost a chance, a snippet, a bit of nothing, a teeny bit of camp life that he just decided to sort of expand upon. But it's sort of wonderfully sort of resonant, for that reason. I think it's, I think the way the kids internalize what they hear and is fascinating. And I think the dog in the family is sort of always scratching at those flower beds, isn't it? And then it's barking at the dogs on the other side. So it's almost like the children and the dogs, somehow they don't have that, because all the adults are going around pretending nothing's happening, right? But the children and the animals don't have that auto inhibitor that tells them to sort of stuff it down, and so it kind of they're barking at what's going on, and the kids are sort of incorporating it into their games. What's going on? They're pretending to kind of gas each other, and they're sort of
In the greenhouse. That's
in the
such a
greenhouse.
chilling moment. Yeah.
Yeah. So I find that to me strikes me as being like I believe that. I sort of think that seems psychologically right. I think that feels accurate in some way. That is how children process things differently to adults, and it also feels like dramatically justified, and like as part of its sort of statement. It's but yeah, it doesn't feel sort of like too much like a work of art. It's not like it's been sort of worked on or sort of fashioned. A lot of it feels found, doesn't it? It sort of feels sort of random and sort of found, the documentary sort of aspect of it. But yeah, endlessly fascinating. It's sort of it's a difficult. I haven't gone back to it since it won the Oscar, but I can imagine it being a kind of rewarding, and I think there's so much to kind of get out of it. Some films sort of live on, don't they, in your mind's eye, and they kind of have a sort of an afterlife in your head, and this is definitely one of them for me. I think it definitely it haunts you a little bit.
I think to go back to the dog for a second as well, there's
Yeah.
a strange irony or absurdity in watching the dog sort of, while they're laying out the food for the party, and you see the
Yeah.
dog sort of going back and forth, and it's sort of, and you can hear what's going on the other side of the fence, and yet you're sort of thinking, somebody grab that dog, it's going to get the meat, and it's going to take something off the table, and you're distracted by the dog in a way that is, so you're, in that sense, this film is sort of truly interactive because it's forcing you into situations where you're kind of discounting things that you think shouldn't be discounted. You're losing perspective even as you're being given the perspective. Another example of this, aside from the dog and the meats on the table, the cold cuts, is when Hedwig and Rudy. He gives her the news that the family's going to have to move, and again we have that wonderful sort of classical irony of her saying, this is Auschwitz, this is my dream, this is we've made a home here, this is a paradise, and you have that dissonance, that cognitive dissonance of sort of going, no, this is absolutely monstrous, but also, yes, you do have a nice garden.
Yeah.
It is a nice house.
The film is, I think the film is, in a way, it's kind of putting its audience through the same sort of, if you like, numbing kind of active sort of dissociation that clearly and reportedly, those who perpetrated these crimes actually experienced in order to do so, right? The whole sort of machinery of death is basically there because, Himmler was concerned about the damage that was being done to the SS, men of the SS who were having to execute Jews in the forest point blank, and they came away from the experience sort of shaken and unable to sort of do it again, or kind of, it took a while to acclimatize, and he was sort of trying to find a way to spare his precious SS the trauma of mass execution, and so hence the death cap. That's where and why the death camps originated, and so they're essentially, the whole sort of machinery of them is about allowing the perpetrators to not feel that they are in fact perpetrating these crimes. So even the people clearing up the corpses are are Jews. That everything is about, you know, allowing it to you know, people to kind of be in the process of committing these crimes without feeling that they are, and softening that, you know, that weight. And in much the same way that today, you know, you have drone operators who are killing remotely, and the technology is allowing them to not feel guilty of murdering a person who otherwise is being quite intimately observed, you know, and you know, and it's sort of, or again, the person that kind of presses the button that launches the nuclear bomb. Like, there's all these sort of ways of, you know, blocking the person from the otherwise crushing guilt that they would feel. And I think kind of what, you know, Glazer's doing in the zone of interest is he's allowing us to feel that dissociation, you know, as an audience, because that's what the experience of watching the movie is. It's a sort of visceral sense of disconnect between what we're seeing and then what we know is going on, where to the point where we almost have to remind ourselves of what's going on. But we see how all too easy it is to start worrying about the dog taking the cold cuts from the table, or to be concerned about, you know, the fact that he's just got this promotion and how's she going to deal with it, and you know,
mother's visiting.
Yeah, exactly right. And you think, oh no, this is. I believe on some level, I believe this is how it might have felt, how one might go about these things. Is, you know, only if you experience that. So that's maybe why it's so chilling, or why it's really a kind of a horror movie in a sense. It's sort of like, what could be more chilling than to sort of feel that, or be given a glimpse of what that might feel like. Because the thing that, you know, what the phrase "the banality of evil" gets at is that whenever people went to these men and tried to interview them expecting a monster, they never found it, and they were always crushingly disappointed that the man sat in the chair opposite them, who they were, you know, interrogating, saying, "Well, why did you do this? And how? What didn't you feel this?" They didn't feel in any way like they were kind of. They didn't seem evil. Quote, open quote, close quote. They just seemed morally absent, you know, functionaries, and so that dissonance, that's what, you know, that's what we call the banality of evil. But it really doesn't, you know, it's just a sort of disappointment that the men are almost not equal to the crimes they're committing, or that they're sort of infinitely smaller than the crimes they're committing. You know, and I think that again is kind of what you get. I think he chose his actors very well. I think that there is simply, you know, if you were to look at the performance of what's the name of the lead actor?
Christian Friedel.
Okay, if you were to look at that performance out of context and say, and just give it to a bunch of film students and said, what kind of man is this? There's not a single thing in that performance that betrays that this is a wicked man. Like, there's not a harsh edge on him. He's very sort of soft featured. He's very kind of soft spoken, and the way he plays him betrays zero knowledge of, you know, the evil being sort of perpetrated.
You even feel sorry for him sometimes, you know, when he phones his wife late at night to say how happy he is he's coming home, and she's like, "Is that it? Can I go to bed now?" You know, she's not. She doesn't share his delight. As far as she's concerned, he should never have gone away. So, you know,
I mean, it's interesting in a way that I feel more judgment towards her because we see her putting the fur coat on. We know where that's come from, and that somehow seems crueler than he does. But then, of course, we're not seeing where he spends his days. So there's a, you know, it's an unfair comparison. But I felt definitely in reviews and watching it that there's more opprobrium sort of leveled at Huller than at him.
Yeah, if a man does something evil, watch out the woman standing near him, because she's going to get it, you know, Sonia Sutcliffe style.
Definitely. But I definitely admire his performance for being so utterly in his own head blameless. It's very hard. Especially for a German to play that. I think the temptation would be to telegraph, to sort of signal that you get it, right? The very least I can do is play this guy like the most wicked of fiends, and it takes a certain kind of bravery to just not even go there the slightest bit, and I think the same actually is true of her too. I think that it's kind of clean performance in that regard. I don't think she's ever kind of inviting us to kind of, to hate this woman. She just seems lost to us. I think both of them. I mean, it's interesting that the movie is never boring because, the level of identification we have with them it's a different kind. It's definitely not, as I say, traditional Hollywood identification. Like, oh, I hope he gets the job, or whatever it is. It's much more a little bit like watching. I think did he say this? Like, it's like watching insects in a glass cage. Like, you're just watching these creatures go about their business, and it's actually kind of fascinating how they're building this nest. But you're not. They don't seem humanly all there. Let's say, and there's something. It could be like they could be a species of animal or something. I know that's a terrible thing to say. They're humans, and of course that's part of it. But what I mean is there's something very distant about the way that we're watching them. Sort of, and yet it's never boring for that. That's perhaps the other thing to point out is that even though there's this queasy sort of mixture of detachment and at times a kind of sympathy. Incidental almost, and yet it's never boring. I think that's kind of quite something, and also it's never showing us anything. So, and all we're seeing is flowers and gardening and meetings around a table.
I mean, what's quite funny, I think, is funny. That's the wrong word, obviously, but yeah, I think there's definitely this agenda to collapse the them and the us, the then and the now. So a German actor might think, well, we're not all Nazis, and Jonathan Glazer wants to say, we kind of all are,
Right.
We're all potentially Nazis.
Well, that's why it's so interesting that he chose those white uniforms because, he gets away from all the normal visual motives that sort of say, oh, this is a Nazi, which are the kind of grey and black uniforms. He gives us things we haven't even seen before. I've never even seen those white uniforms before. I know that they were worn. I've certainly never seen them, except, of course, where sometimes you see movies where they're kind of in a snowscape. That's different. So he sort of defamiliarizes all the normal sort of easy access points by which you kind of go, oh, Nazis. And I think you're absolutely right. Like, to me, I didn't spend too much time. I think we've sort of, I was immediately seeing. I saw it not too long after I'd seen Oppenheimer, and not too long after I'd seen Killers of the Flower Moon, and I was struck by the fact that we had. I was thinking about the fact that all those movies are to some extent about genocide, and had these sort of different ways of sort of approaching it, but there were some similarities too. I mean, with the Oppenheimer movie. The way that Nolan shows the use of sound is sort of similar to that in The Zone of Interest, in that sort of we're hearing when he's addressing that hall, and they're all kind of triumphantly saying, "Yeah, you did it, OP," and he's getting this kind of big triumphant hurrah, but he just is hearing the odd scream in the sound mix, and you're not seeing it anything, not yet anyway. But you're just hearing, and the sound stuff is kind of really a little bit similar. Like we can't see it, but we can hear it, and it's very, very unsettling. So, and again, Oppenheimer is sort of its own answer to the question of how do you make a protagonist of a sort of morally dubious sort of human. And I think that the conclusion that Nolan came to is certainly like the biopic, normal sort of biopic format needs to be completely kind of, broken up and sort of Picassoed and sort of, you just can't do it. You cannot run. Here's a basic rule of cinema: you cannot have a biopic, at least as it's traditionally conceived, about a bad man. It's an impossible thing. The biopic is inherently geared towards, the achievements of sort of great men and women, and you can't. The only way you can get around that is if you just chop it up like Nolan did. But again, it's sort of, there is something going on there, which is how guilt is deferred. How a sort of moral numbness, allows, the machinery of genocide to sort of go forward. And I did see a link. I was definitely seeing, when I saw Zone of Interest, I was thinking, I was thinking of Gaza. I was thinking of drone operators. I was thinking of the nuclear technology that Oppenheimer was coming up with. It just, he'd achieved his aim. He had stopped this being, oh, that's just about the Second World War, to, oh, this is going on with sort of other genocides, and that whole way of thinking about, of kind of anesthetizing yourself to them is still current. It's still going on, and it's sort of very topical.
Well, there was a recent photograph. I think it was taken. I'm not sure if it was taken from Israel or if it was taken from within like a settler's compound, and there was basically a swing set and a green grass garden, a big wall, and then overlooking it were just the ruins, the moonscape of Gaza, and people were making a direct reference to the poster from Zone of Interest as like, this is the poster of Zone of Interest, and it's Israel. It's not, or it's the Middle East. It's not. It's no longer Nazis. And as much as that comparison has always been something that people, right-minded people, have tried to shy away from, with good reason and with good argument, it's becoming increasingly difficult to do so. You have to twist yourself into pretzel shapes to get away from it.
Definitely. I mean, I think there's a generation has come along, a younger generation who, if you like, haven't grown up in the shadow of the Second World War, as we were. And even though our lives didn't sort of overlap with the Second World War, our family members absolutely, we've all have family members who have direct experience of it, and we hear about it, and whether it's people hiding in shelters, whether it's people taking part in the armed conflict, whatever it is, we as children, we kind of grew up with it, and we saw the Dam Busters on TV, and the Second World War was definitely a very palpable presence. And I think what you have now, and it's sort of, it's sort of fascinating. It's, it's new, and you've got this first generation of people who have not, if you like, being oriented entirely through Second World War movies as we were, and they are kind of cut. And I think in a way, Glazer is sort of anticipating and part of that movement. He's sort of, this film offended, I think, a lot. I mean, I think it offended the Son of Saul director was one of those who came out and laid into Glazer's speech at the Oscars, where he, essentially made a case of his own allegiance for the plight of the Palestinians and what was happening in Gaza, and making the point that you've just made. And he got hammered, as we know, and there was a big outcry. And I thought it was a really interesting, kind of litmus test for kind of Hollywood. It seemed to split everybody right down the middle. It was not a easy to predict. I mean, it wasn't a scandal exactly, a sort of little mini scandal, but it just sort of like, it definitely kind of, the way things parted was sort of revealing. And I remember being really disappointed, actually, that the director of Son of Saul had sort of taken that. I sort of felt these films, you're making these are all part of the same project. This is your filmmaking sort of colleague and collaborator. But I do think, yeah, Glazer is sort of, and this film is sort of part of this slightly, it's the sort of, I don't quite know what the pivot point would be, but I do think that Gaza is a sort of big pivot point. I think there is sort of the way that the Holocaust, was thought about before, and then there's the way it's being kind of contextualized now. And the zone of interest is definitely a part of that. And it seems to be the part that's pointing forward into the future. It does not feel like it belongs to the past. It feels part of a kind of future conversation about what's going on. So it's quite, in that sense, it's really quite, in that sense, it's quite avant-garde. I mean, in
Oh,
the
yeah.
that.
Absolutely. I mean, you talked about like the multiple camera setups and the thing. I mean, one of the things you talked about once was in Bologna was how it meant that his continuity would work. That someone would basically they would do one day and the continuity was perfect because they would catch. So for instance, there's a scene where the paterfamilias, the father, goes from room to room, turning all the lights off and making all the doors are locked. A very domestic, ordinary action. But the cutting takes place more or less exactly synchronized with him going from one room to the next and to the next. And it's exactly how we would watch a reality show. The contestant has gone from one part to the next, and now the contestant is in the garden, and now the contestant is walking down the corridor towards a confessional, and you would follow them with those precise cuts. And so again, it collapses any sense that we're watching something on celluloid, something which is from the past, something which is, finally, I think I think this is a good place for us to sort of start to sort of wrap up our discussion. But that final section, which is him staring down the corridor, having drank a bit too much, or perhaps had an oyster that wasn't very good, or perhaps feeling some moral queasiness, but that seems to be the least likely. And he stares at the camera, he breaks the fourth wall, and we get this remarkable darkness, which you've kind of been prepared for because there have been moments in the film where the camera's gone into flowers or the screen is, at the very beginning, starts black and you have this musical prelude, a little bit like Lawrence of Arabia, actually, an overture. You'll get an epilogue at the end, which will just be music and darkness as well. In the book, I refer to it as air gapping the film, so that you don't have, you're prepared, you're disconnected from the real world in both cases. And then you go to the present day Auschwitz, and this was where, for me, it won the argument I had been having with myself, because it was saying this isn't a dramatization of the past. This is a action of the present, which is analogous to these women, no more important, no less important than these women cleaning and preserving the artifacts. And I just thought that was a stroke of genius, which at the same time didn't show off its genius.
Can I ask you something? Did you think that when he retches at the end? Because I must admit, I took that as moral. When I took that as a sign of his guilt, I thought that's what that is. Because I remember him reading about him. He was impressed by Joshua Oppenheimer's The Act of Killing, and in that movie, you have one of the torturers who's been showing off all these places and techniques where he used to kind of strangle and kill and garrote his victims. And he's been as happy as Larry doing little dances, all the rest of it. And at the very end of that movie, walking around another of these kind of killing sites, he suddenly is overcome with a grotesque series of convulsive retches that it's almost, I take it to be, that he's blocked out these acts as forcefully as any human can in order to sort of carry on with his life. His body is rebelling. Like the mind can suppress do amazing things at denial and oppression, and just sort of blocking all these things out, but your body does not.
Yeah,
And
the
I kind
return
of
of the repressed.
and I sort of think that that's kind of what we're seeing, when he's retching at the end of the zone of interest, that like, his body is registering what his mind and conscience cannot. So I don't know. It's interesting to see, is that, I mean, I didn't think that was a bad oyster. I sort of thought that's him being, kind of, it was, I mean, and it probably is too. I mean, as far as I know, that's his, that's his invention. That's kind of not him, I don't think there's anything like that in the Hess memoir. The opposite, in fact. It's sort of stunningly blank. So I think like that's sort of Glazer, putting something into it. That
definitely happens. There are loads of things in like, for instance, the film opens with Hoss's birthday, and his birthday's in December. So the fact that they've moved it to the summer to give it colors and lights and the garden and everything is an example. Another example would be like many camp command. It goes a little bit with this Hannah Arendt idea of the banality of evil, which we were talking about earlier. A lot of these camp commanders and higher ups were encouraged, to the point of it being kind of a job requirement, to be very brutal, like themselves personally, to murder people with their own hands, to get blood on their shoes. And the idea was they would build up a reputation of like, we're all Nazis, but Jesus, this guy, did you hear what he did yesterday? And they would really sort of like, there was a spectacular element to their cruelty, which is very far away from sort of the banality that we see on screen. In fact, Rudolf Hoss had gone to prison for murder prior to the Nazis taking power. So he was by no means like a meek, he was a convicted murderer. Prior to Hitler's rise to power, as a Nazi member in political violence. But so
interesting.
There is a sort of thumb on the scale with a very clear sort of reasoning to why you would put the thumb on the scale, because because the reality actually runs towards the cliche. And if you're wanting to get away from the cliche, he wants to have he doesn't want to have Auschwitz in the winter, because that's how we always think of it. But Polish summers are nice and warm and hot,
Sure.
I think in England, especially, we think of Poland as being a wintry place. It's not.
Yeah.
You get better summers than you do in England.
Yeah. Well, it's like the uniforms. It's just part of this defamiliarizing tactic. Of like taking us away from all the kind of familiar signposts that sort of tell us how to feel and what to think about what we're seeing. But it's that's interesting about the kind of the drawing out of the woodwork of the crueler men, the bad apples, and that seems very much a part of it. You sort of forget to, like, there was such a kind of, on the everyday level, just a sort of celebration of heartlessness. Like there was a sort of, just a little bit like MAGA now, where they're sort of, the cruelty is the point. What they say about the kind of just in sort of conversation, or just as you went about your day, there was a kind of almost an expectation that a member of the Nazi Party would just be kind of casually cruel in their sort of daily business. It was sort of part of the kind of the very, very earliest bits of kind of indoctrination. It's like to encourage a kind of a national heartlessness that would eventually, result in the kind of the blackest of all. But it just sort of, it sort of starts on that kind of that daily level of kind of just encouraging cruelty. And so, it's a remarkable film. I think.
What did you think of those final moments in when we go forward to the museum, essentially?
I mean, it sort of at that point, I think it kind of, it becomes a kind of a cousin of Shoah, the sort of documentary that just sort of says, well, if you like, that's the sort of final surrender of fictional method to factual, which I think is kind of the sort of underlying. I mean, the same thing happens at the end of Schindler's List, really, where the point where it suddenly becomes a documentary of them laying the stones on the grave of Schindler. There's definitely a sense where filmmakers approaching this subject feel that their sort of flimsy fictions about this subject are not really necessary or welcome, So what a relief, in a sense, when you sort of can finally sort of throw it all off and just say, actually, fact is really the only thing that we can insist on here. But yeah, at that point, yes, I did. It just sort of, it was, it suddenly connected with its documentary brethren, if you like, and it sort of felt appropriate. So it was definitely a very daring movie to make. I mean, there must have been a lot of. I would be so interested to hear how he, if you like, talked himself into it, because my God, to do this in this way, I mean, to give yourself permission to do it, is quite, takes some balls. I mean, it's like it's very daring. I mean, it's like it's scary, actually. And I think in interviews, I seem to remember hearing sometimes that fear in him. How was this going to go down? And I think I heard nervousness, actually, in the reception it was going to get, whenever he was interviewed about it. And I could absolutely imagine that, like, when you're going to make a film about the Holocaust in which you see not a single victim, you see, essentially luncheons and flowers, and like, it definitely is. It's a very I mean, in conception, it's highly original, and like all these things, to sort of step out into the unknown and then sort of bring this thing into existence, and must have been, in a sense, terrifying, so I mean, hats off to him. I mean, I think it's a sort of brave film, and I think it's sort of, I mean, I haven't heard people going back to it. I don't know quite whether people will or not, but I don't think you need to either. I don't think that doesn't really, the fact that I'm not just sort of watching it on repeat on HBO or whatever, it doesn't matter. Who cares? I mean, you see things once. Kale used to see things once, and that was it. Never a second time, never a third time, never sort of, so it doesn't matter. It's in our heads now, it's in us. So that's kind of where the film is going to be.
I was saying before we started recording as well that, if I wasn't writing the book, then I wouldn't necessarily have gone back and rewatched it, short of what you did, which was like go with someone to show somebody it, which sort of is in a way just encouraging people to go and see it.
It's always a mistake, by the way. I as a film critic, I am often in that position, because I will see things on my own and I'll take family members to see it. It's not worth doing that, because you sit there kind of feeling almost as nervous as the filmmaker themselves, like, liking it. Do they what's going on? What's their reaction? And it's like, you're totally out of it. You're not watching the film. You're watching them. Like, I hope they're liking it. Did you like that? Like, no. So
it's like playing somebody a song at a dinner party. It's like, everybody shut up, I've got this brilliant song to play you. It's sort of like, no, the song is not going to be as good as the conversation was, so you might as well let it be. I mean, I think in terms of its reception, the film it won an important prize at Cannes, it won the Oscar, it's his most successful film critically. I think Sexy Beast was kind of drowned out by the number of gangster movies that came out that year. That was the year sort of Snatch came out and Gangster Number One came out, and so it was a flood of British gangster movies. Birth was absolutely flopped and was ridiculed and laughed out, and has since become a more, you know, a more cult, a refound sort of cult film.
Definitely.
Under the Skin was booed both at the press screening that I saw. Something I was told yesterday was that it was also booed at the premiere, which is very rare. Often films can be booed at the press screening, but usually when Scarlett Johansson is in the audience is there to see the glitz and the glamour and the stars and something, and they tend to restrain themselves from, even if they do feel something negative, they don't do it with the person in the room. But in this case, they weren't. And someone told me that Johansson turned to Glazer and said, "What does it mean? What does it mean?" The you know, and he thought she wasn't really. She didn't. Maybe she didn't understand that the booing was booing, and she said, "Oh, they're discussing the film. You know, they're making noise discussing the film." And she went, "No, I know they're booing. What does it mean for my career?"
Oh.
So it was,
well,
it was like that, you know, have I tanked my own career with this? Which I mean, personally, I think Under the Skin she's never been better. That and Lost in Translation are the two films that she rules. So Zone of Interest was, in that sense, in this sense, has been kind of a triumph. But the speech at the Oscars was certainly daring, courageous, and I think he's taken a hell of a hit for it.
Yeah. That's where you kind of felt that, like that again. That's he was stepping out of his again. It must have been terrifying to make that statement. I would imagine. You can imagine what the reaction is going to be. And again, I remember thinking, wow, that's incredibly ballsy, and I was very, very grateful that he had. And I mean, it's just it's interesting. There's a stubbornness in him, isn't there? There's definitely a kind of he's sort of hewing to his own compass, and it's evident in the film, and it's evident in the reaction to the film, and the way that people were outraged, by what he said. But yeah, I mean, it's sort of, that's really kind of, I guess, the overriding sort of feeling about it. It's just sort of, the courage it took to make it. I mean, maybe it doesn't feel like that to him. Maybe when you're just sort of pursuing something, you're too busy, lost in the pursuit to really sort of think about the radicalism of what you're doing. But at a certain point, it must have dawned on him. Certainly, as it started to meet its audience, and but yeah, that it was such a hit. I mean, remarkable, really. But I think it's just partly it was something new. I mean, the experience of watching it is unlike that of watching any movie that you've seen. It doesn't, it's sort of, as critics, we sort of sit there in the theatre, don't we? We're kind of hooked up to all these kind of EKG monitors and sort of heart monitors and pulse rates, and at least that's how I always see it. I always imagine myself festooned with wires, and measuring kind of what you're going through physiologically, and I think what you're going through physiologically in that movie is something very interesting indeed and very unusual, that doesn't resemble the response to any other movie that you may have watched, and that experience of kind of wild dissociation under which kind of evil acts proliferate is really unsettling, and and you get a kind of glimpse of what that feels like in the film, and and it's probably it's sort of true, it's properly and chilling, really the experience of the movie. Not in the slightest, there's no warmth to it. There's no sympathy in it. It's quite sort of pitiless, it sounds unwatchable, and then yet, I was riveted. It's a paradox. I mean, it has all the recipes being a kind of an unwatchable kind of art house experiment that somehow cleaved to some kind of psychological reality. Like I keep coming back to this. I really think it's after something. I don't think it's just technique. I think he's trying to distill the sensibility, the fear, the interior life of the men and women who committed these crimes. And it's bizarre because all he's doing is observing their kind of outside, their exteriors, and he's not making the slightest attempt to kind of get at their insides in the normal way that Hollywood movies do. But somehow the sort of the ambiance of the entire film somehow gives you an idea of what their interiors might feel like, might kind of look like and sound like. And from that kind of pink glow, to the furnaces, to that sort of terrible sort of rumble that you hear, which isn't apparently the furnaces. It's in fact just the sound of the camp, which, as Auschwitz was vast, a town essentially. The amount of electricity it used was sort of easily equal to sort of several small towns, and so really what you're hearing is kind of just the sound of a city. Yeah. That rumble, that kind of, it's the sound of a city at work, and it's a terrible city. I mean, it's a city, but yeah, the architecture of the movie, the sounds, the ambience of it, I think they're all giving us a sense of the sort of interiors of these people.
This final question I wanted to ask you, Tom, is Jonathan Glazer's made 4 films in the course of some 20, 24, 25 years. Maybe a little bit less. Is it 2000 Sexy Beast? I think it is 2000.
Yeah.
And so 4 films, not by any means as many as Guy Ritchie or some other contemporary filmmakers, Danny Boyle, British filmmakers. And yet, to my mind, I don't think there is anyone in Britain making films at that level of, artistry, heft, challenging, etc., etc. And variety. I mean, he spans genres and yet also manages to be sort of consistently himself. Maybe the outlier is possibly Sexy Beast, just because it's much more verbal than his other films.
Yeah.
But and it's much more, obviously the work of the script feels much more important than perhaps he had less of a hand in. So how would you place him in that sort of British filmmaking or even international?
Well, I mean, it's curious. I mean, all those things are true, and yet until Zone of Interest, nobody I knew had ever heard of him. It's so remarkable. He's had this kind of, one of the great joys in a way of like kind of Glazer's career is that like he was this, so rarely that you come across like a genuine cult filmmaker in the sense of, people really, really thinking he was very good, and then but your family members or friends have never seen a single film of his, and it meant that a film like Birth had an amazing. It felt like you're a member of the Masons if you like that movie. you would kind of go up to people that and sort of say, "Hey, have you by any chance seen this sort of weird movie?" And they would say Birth, and then you would realize, okay, you can relax. You're amongst your Masonic brethren, and in a way, that's over now. I think the zone of interest has made it. He's now everybody sort of knows who he is. So it's that point where we must give him up and see what happens. See if he can now withstand the slightly the currents tugging him. I'm sure it won't tug him to the mainstream, not in a million years, but a different set of kind of. Scarlett Johansson's question about what does this mean? I think, in a way, we could probably ask that of him now, like the zone of interest, like what does this mean? Like where do you go from here? But yeah, I mean, I definitely think there's such variety in those films. I mean, he takes his time. It's like Kubrick. He's not sort of comparing him to Kubrick, but like he's certainly not sort of belting them out and. There's something kind of intriguingly kind of under the radar about him, or has been. So not quite sure how visibility is going to kind of suit him, or if it will at all, or whether he'll just try and alienate everybody as fast as possible, so that he can go back to being under the radar again.
There was a year in the 1990s where every indie band gave an interview saying their next album they want to lose half of their fan base because they want to refine their fan base by alienating half of them. So he might do a Pixies bossa nova album or something.
I mean, listen, the Oscar speech, I think, kind of pretty much did the version of that. Like, that was his version of those indie bands losing half their fan base. I mean,
and he walked off that and refused to do any press. It was sort of like no further questions. It was and hasn't really hasn't spoken about it publicly. You haven't seen him since. That's. I mean, I was surprised to see he was at this event in Bologna because I thought,
Did he seem like a hunted or haunted man?
Not at all. Not at all. He was a little chippy. I thought he was a little chippy in the sort of, it was an event. It was an audience with, and he was being interviewed on stage, and then he took a couple of questions, and he did tend to sort of come back with like, how long until the next film? Well, it depends on how long this interview goes. That sort of answer, and you're sort of okay. But then I kind of bum rushed the stage to introduce myself because I had not been able to get any I'd not been able to get any contact with him. I failed to penetrate various email addresses, and which was ironic that having written a book about Malick, I had less to go with Glazer than I did with Malick. And actually, when I did actually get through his security and publicity people, he was really affable and was very surprised and shocked that I'd written a book about it. He was sort of joking about it and then saying, "No, what? Wait a minute, you've really written a book about it? I thought you were joking." and he seemed very surprised and also pleased, and we left it on good terms. So I'm sending him a copy, and let's hope. At a certain point, it would be nice if someone appreciates your work, etc. But and is taken seriously. But there's only so much we can control.
Yeah, I mean that's I think the ultimate compliment, isn't it? It's not you're not trying to kind of raise his tomato meter by a few percentage points. It's through the depth of everybody wants to be taken seriously, like they want to be engaged with on a kind of on a deeper level than just thumbs up, thumbs down, and so I can only think that your book does that for him.
Let's hope so. Well, thank you so much, Tom, for taking the time to talk to me, and I look forward to talking to you again in November when you have your new book about Paul Greengrass is going to hit the shelves.
Oh, definitely. Let's talk again in November. Can't wait.
Brilliant. Take care, Tom.
All right. Thanks, John.